So last weekend, we wrapped up our 6-week Dinner with Jesus Hospitality Dare series. However, we are not wanting to let the opportunities for greater hospitality miss us. And so with a little bit more on that, here's Pastor John.
Well, church, we want to take a moment as a community to acknowledge the devastating impact that these wildfires are having on so many. Some of you have experienced direct loss yourselves. Many of you have family or friends who are being affected, and we've watched as entire communities have been displaced. I can't imagine what it's like to flee at a moment's notice, not knowing if your home will still be there when you return. We're so grateful for those working tirelessly in this crisis. We pray for strength and comfort and resilience for everyone impacted. This past week, I had a chance to visit the evacuation site on Leela Avenue and to connect with the frontline agencies offering care and support. I mean, these are remarkable people serving with selfless dedication, and they shared with me some specific needs. And so as a church, we want to respond in a practical and generous way to these needs. So this week, we're collecting donations of the following requested items: individual snacks like fruit cups, puddings, or applesauces, etc., and travel-sized shampoos or lotions, new socks and new underwear, especially women's small and medium-sized, ready-made baby formula, diaper rash cream, and cases of canned Pepsi. You can find this list on the website or app, and you can drop these donations off at any of our services or during the week between Tuesday and Friday from 9 to 4:30 at the fire hall. In addition, Mennonite Disaster Services at the Leela Center are looking for more volunteers. If you're able to help, send me an email at john@riverwood.cc and I'll connect you directly with the volunteer coordinator there. This week, we will continue our conversations to explore other ways we can respond as a church, so stay tuned for more opportunities. You know, as we've said over these last 6 weeks together, hospitality flows when our hands and our hearts are open and when we act with generosity to help someone feel seen and loved. This is the hospitality Jesus lived out and the kind he invites us into. So whether it's dropping off a few donations here, offering your time, or finding another way to step in, let's continue to keep our eyes open and continue putting hospitality into action.
So thank you to everybody who is already in the room, brought so much stuff for our food bank and for the fire evacuee relief, and we're going to continue that over the next number of weeks, so you can go grocery shopping, take those lists, and come and do some generosity and hospitality in that way. I would love to kick off this new series by projecting a movie inside of your mind. So if you will indulge me, would you please close your eyes and begin to watch this movie unfold before your eyes. Do you hear them? Caleb whispered. Outside, footsteps. Again, every night I wonder, will it be tonight? Will they come for me? Are they coming for us? Adira looked at Caleb, her forehead wrinkled with stress. They took Miriam last week, she whispered. Dragged her in the streets. No trial, no chance to speak. Her only crime? Hosting a church in her house. Caleb was staring off in the distance. Eli found his shop destroyed yesterday. The walls smeared with filth. Blasphemer, it said. Caleb, it's getting bad. I can't go to the market without hearing the whispers, traitor, heretic, atheist, just because I won't worship Caesar. Even my mother won't look me in the eye anymore. I thought following him would bring life, Caleb confessed. Freedom, peace, joy, salvation. You know, not this. And did you hear what Nero is doing to Christ's followers in Rome? Caleb didn't wait for an answer. Rumors were spreading that Nero had started the great fire himself, so to protect himself, he blamed the Christians. That was all he needed. Now he's drenching them in oil and lighting them on fire. He's created these bizarre theatrical shows where Christians are executed in some grotesque way. He's sewing Christians into animal skins and letting the wild dogs and lions eat them as the crowds cheer. Caleb, stop. This isn't helping, scolded Adira. After a brief silence, she turned to Caleb. What if we're wrong? Don't say that, Caleb reprimanded. Adira pushed on. I'm just saying what everybody's thinking. We left everything behind for him, Caleb countered. Yeah, and now we're getting left behind, Adira blurted. Caleb didn't want to admit it, but he was feeling the same. I miss the quiet, Adira confessed. I miss the pouring rituals, the rhythm of the synagogue traditions, the way things used to be. What would happen if we just walked away from this? Grabbing Caleb's arm, she pressed in. Is this really worth dying for? Shh, chided Caleb. Did you hear that? Someone's outside the door. Look, Adira said, pointing to the bottom of the door. The whispers in the room grew silent. Everyone watched as Caleb cautiously moved to the door to investigate the letter that had been slid underneath. Realizing it was a message, Caleb quickly moved to the flickering candle, opening the letter, and began skimming the contents. Well, what does it say? Adira pressed. Caleb began reading slowly. Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. And now in these final days, he has spoken to us through his Son. Caleb paused, trying to understand the message. Patience was never one of Adira's strongest qualities. Well, go on. What else does it say? Caleb began skimming ahead, paraphrasing what he was reading. It says, Jesus is better. Jesus is better than angels. Jesus is better than Moses. Jesus is better than the high priest. He's better than the temple. He's better than anything we left behind. Listen to this. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. So do not throw away this confident trust in the Lord. Remember the great reward it brings you. Skimming forward, patience, endurance is what you need now. So you will continue to do God's will. Then you will receive all that has been promised. Let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus. It says he's worth it, so don't give up. It's a message from God, Adira whispered. It's a message from Jesus, Caleb added. It says Jesus is better than safety, better than ritual, better than life itself. Church, this little scene is historical fiction, but the letter that it draws our attention to is so very real. And it's a letter that was not only written to people who were facing severe persecution and pressure and harassment and troubles. It's a letter written to every Christian who has ever found themselves between pressure and promise, fear and faithfulness, compromise and commitment. It's a letter that is to every person who has ever wondered, who is Jesus really? Welcome to the letter, the New Testament letter or book of Hebrews. Now, this is a book that was written to any believer who has ever wondered, should I stay or should I walk away? And for the next 13 weeks, we are going to be studying the 13 chapters of the book of Hebrews. Now, in order to understand this book, I want to throw 8 really fast facts at you because this is a very interesting and very unique. In fact, it's probably the second hardest and most mysterious book in the New Testament, and I want you to understand it. So let me throw some fast facts at you. Number 1, it is the only anonymous New Testament book. No other book in the New Testament it comes with this idea that we have no clue who actually wrote it. Number 2, it features the best Greek in the New Testament. The book of Hebrews has this polished, sophisticated, exquisite Greek language and vocabulary and structure. It really is a literary masterpiece. Number 3, it's not actually a letter. It's not addressed to any particular group of people. There's no salutation. There's no farewell at the end of it. It really is much more of a sermon transcript that we're reading. Number 4, it is obsessed with the word better. 13 times in these 13 chapters, we come across this idea or this actual word that Jesus is better. Number 5, it features Old Testament quotations galore. There are more than 30 direct quotations from the Old Testament in this book and many more additional allusions and insinuations. Number 6, it is directed to those in danger of spiritual drifting. It seems to be written to a bunch of believers who are struggling with their faith, in danger of possibly drifting or shrinking back or falling away from their faith because of the difficult times that they were going through. It is a spiritual wake-up call. Number 7, it was probably written before the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. So there's no reference in this book anywhere to the temple destruction, and it's written as if the sacrifices and the procedures and rituals of the temple were continuing. This helps us to date it somewhere between 60 and 69 AD, which is an era of where there was a lot of persecution taking place. It was just beginning to erupt, and where the Rome fire had happened in 64 AD, and there was intense persecution happening to Christians. And finally, number 8, it gives the most magnificent portrait of Christ in all of Scripture. It is layer upon layer of imagery and reasoning. This book showcases and spotlights the glory, the magnificence, the majesty, and the splendor of Christ like no other book. So, what we're going to do for 13 weeks is we are going to dive in and we are going to do Bible study and we are going to learn together and we're going to take every chapter apart. I'm very excited about this study. And to do so, we're going to begin by studying chapter 1. And chapter 1 only has 14 verses, so I figure we might as well read the whole chapter and then we'll take it apart bit by bit to understand it. So here we go. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. And now in these final days, he has spoken to us through his Son. God promised everything to the Son as an inheritance, and through the Son, he created the universe. The Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very nature or the very character of God, and he sustains everything by his mighty power and his command. When he has cleansed us from our sin, he sat down in the place of honor at the right hand of the majestic God in heaven. This shows that the Son is far greater than the angels, just as the name God gave him is greater than their name. For God never said to any angel what he said to Jesus, "You are my Son. Today I have become your Father." God also said, "I will be your Father, and he will be my Son." And when he brought him his supreme Son into the world, God said, "Let all of God's angels worship him." Regarding the angels, he said, he sends his angels like the wind, his servants like flames of fire. But to the Son, he said, "Your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. You rule with a scepter of justice. You love justice and hate evil. Therefore, O God, your God has anointed you, pouring out the oil of joy on you more than anyone else." He also said to the Son, "In the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundation of the earth and made the heavens with your hands. They will perish, but you remain forever. They will wear out like old clothing. You will fold them up like a cloak and discard them like old clothing, but you are always the same. You will live forever." And God never said to any of the angels, "Sit in the place of honor at the right hand until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet." Therefore, angels are only servants, spirits sent to care for people who will inherit salvation. Okay, there's a lot going on there, and we want to study it and understand it. So what is the main point of this chapter? Well, the main point seems to be that this author is painting a splendid, spectacular picture of who Jesus is. The beauty of this portrait is that it is exquisite, it is detailed, it is radiant, it is magnificent, and so alive, it almost sings off of the page, but it is also multi-layered. Every stroke of the author's brush paints the supremacy of Christ with deep hues of his divinity saturated in the awe-inducing eternal brilliance, and yet so many of us And so many people walk right past this magnificent portrait, not understanding its true value. 6 years ago, there was a 90-year-old woman in France who was being forced to move out. She had to downsize, and so she invited her grandkids over, and they started working on her apartment to clean it out. And she took, at one point, she took this picture that was hanging over the hot plate for as long as she could remember, and it was all grease-filled, and she took it, and she was opening a garbage bag. It was only about this big, and she was opening a garbage bag ready to throw it out. And one of the grandkids said, "Oh, Grandma, where did you get that picture? Tell me about that picture." She says, "You know what? I don't even remember. I don't know where it came from. It's just been here forever, and it's all grimy. I'm going to throw it out." And they said, "Whoa, what? Maybe we should have somebody assess to see if there's any value to that picture." And so she said, "Yeah, sure, take it." So they took it to an art assessor, and this person began looking at it and recognized some unique distinctions in how Christ was being portrayed, and thought, "You know what? I think this might be worth about $100,000. And so they began to clean it up. They began to do some work in removing the grease and looking at the brush strokes and the stylized portraits and the composition and the techniques. And the assessor realized that they were holding a painting by a painter named Chimube from 1290 AD. This was one of 15 paintings that had survived. It was called Christ Mocked. And a year later, the 90-year-old grandma decided to put the painting up for auction. It sold for $36.7 million. Unfortunately, 2 days later, she died. But her kids and grandkids were extremely grateful that they had not thrown this painting in the trash, and they received a tremendous inheritance, all because someone took time to study the portrait that hung over Grandma's hot plate. Today, we want to begin to study the portrait that so many people just simply walk by. When's the last time you read the book of Hebrews and you began to understand what's truly going on here and you appreciated the value? Well, we want to do that. So, what is the author doing? Well, the author is sort of asking a question. Who is Jesus? And then begins to answer the question, setting out arguments and understanding. And so the answer, who is Jesus? Number one, Jesus is God's voice in human form. It says this in verse 1, "Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. And now, in these final days, he has spoken to us through his Son." You see, if you go through the Old Testament, you come to understand that God spoke to many people in many different ways. Lots of times it was through the prophets. In fact, the Old Testament, there are 45 different prophets that God names and uses to speak to people. But he also speaks through written laws, like the Ten Commandments. He spoke through other people, judges and leaders. He spoke through creation, the heavens, the stars, the mountains, the sun, the moon, the trees, the birds, the animals. He speaks through theophanies, which are these moments of visible appearances. You might remember the burning bush, or the cloud of pillar and fire, or the rainbow after the flood. God spoke through angels. God spoke through smoke and through thunder and through lightning and through whispers and through dreams and visions and symbols and rituals and signs and wonders like the splitting of the Red Sea and manna from heaven. And occasionally God even spoke with his own voice to Moses and to Samuel. But all of these methods, as you look at the Old Testament, all these methods are very fragmented. They're very incomplete, inconsistent. They're rather veiled. But the writer here says, long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors, to the prophets. And now, in these final days, he has spoken to us through his Son. Everything changed with the arrival of Jesus. No longer was God's message fragmented or veiled or filtered or staticky or required guessing. Now the message was the messenger, and his name is Jesus. Jesus was not only God's messenger, it's almost like Jesus is God's microphone. Heaven was no longer whispering, it's speaking in surround sound. And in other words, Jesus is what God sounds like, loud and clear. For those coming out of the Old Testament rituals and the Judaism of the Old Testament and are now wondering, life is hard, maybe we should go back to that old way. These opening two verses are a powerful declaration of who Jesus is. But let's move on because we got lots to study here. So verse 2, and now in these final days God has spoken through his Son. God promised everything to the Son as an inheritance, and through the Son he created the universe. Who is Jesus? The portrait reveals, number 2, that Jesus is the owner of everything. Have you ever been with a small child who picks up a toy and insists that it is their toy, even when it actually belongs to someone else? If you're a parent and you've had this experience, it gets rather embarrassing when it's your child and you're visiting at someone else's house and your kid grabs one of the other kids' toys and insists that it's theirs. So you try to reason with them. This isn't yours, this is somebody else's. You try to get them to pry their fingers off of the toy. You try to get them to willingly offer it back to the rightful owner, but what they do is they hang on to it all the harder and they begin to throw a tantrum. Listen, that is not a baby thing or a child thing. That is a human thing. Because every one of us do it. We all get our hands onto the things of life and we insist that they are ours. We hang on so tightly and insist that this is my car, my career, my house, my gizmo, my money, my spouse, my kids, my time, my breath, my health, my life. This is my life and I will determine what I do with it. But the portrait of Christ in Hebrews shatters that illusion and reminds us that everything we have is a temporary trust, borrowed to us by God himself, given to us to be managers of what really belongs to God. From the galaxies to the car you drive, from your job to your skills and talents, from your family to the very breath and heartbeat inside your chest, it all originates from him and ultimately belongs to him, and one day will return to him. God promised everything to the Son as an inheritance, and through the Son, he created the universe. Who is Jesus? Number 3, Jesus is the creator of time and space. One of my favorite things to do is to go out on a very, very dark night, away from all the city lights, and to look up at the heavens. Man, it looks so different. I mean, it's amazing how many stars you can actually see on a pitch black night. And yet, what we're looking at is just a fraction of what is out there. Our Milky Way galaxy alone holds 100 billion stars. And our Milky Way galaxy is just one of an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. I mean, let that just kind of blow your mind. 2 trillion galaxies. What is a galaxy? What is our galaxy? Well, light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. And if you were to travel from one end of the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy, to the other end, at the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second, it would take you 25,000 years. The vastness of our universe is absolutely mind-blowing. The universe is so massive, so layered with galaxies and mystery, and it defies comprehension. And yet the writer of Hebrews chapter 1 verse 2 says that Jesus made it all, and it was all made for him. But let this bend your knee and blow your mind. The God who is able to travel from one end of the universe to the other in mere seconds is a God who loves you so much knows everything about you, knits you together in your mother's womb, knows your every thought, cares for every concern that is on your heart, is excited for your potential and your dreams and where you're going in life, and is personally cheering you on your journey of life and faith. This is a God who created everything. Everything was created for him, and he is in tune with everything. Church, millions of people walk past this portrait and they completely miss the value and the wonder. Millions more have this portrait hanging over the hot plate of their life, and they don't understand how priceless this portrait is. But today, we hit an opportunity to dig in and to look at the stunning clarity and the profound declarations that this portrait is making. Who is Jesus? Number one, Jesus is God's voice in human form. Number two, Jesus is the owner of everything. Number three, Jesus is the creator of time and space. But let's pick up the pace a little bit here and continue reading in verse 3. It says, the Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God, and he sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. The original Greek word here for glory, you probably recognize it, doxa. You remember that old song, that old hymn, doxology? Well, doxa in the Greek means the beauty, the radiant beauty, power, and presence of God made visible. Let's wrap our minds around that for a second. The radiant beauty, power, and presence of God made visible. God's glory is not just out there somewhere. God's glory isn't just a mystical aura that one day we hope to experience when we make it to heaven. God's glory isn't just a Sunday morning word without any Monday morning power. God's glory, his beauty, his power, his presence isn't abstract. It's personal. And his name is Jesus. God's glory walks among us and lights up the darkest corners of our everyday lives. Jesus isn't like God. The author of Hebrews is clarifying for us that Jesus doesn't just reflect God. Jesus is the radiance of God. Imagine this. God is the sun, and in this imperfect illustration, Jesus is the shining rays of light. You can't see the sun without the shining rays of light. And you never truly see God without seeing Jesus. The light isn't separate from the sun. The light is the sun coming to you. Maybe to put it in a more tangible, understandable way, I wonder if you have one of these in a junk drawer. You probably do. It's an old solar-powered calculator. Remember these? We don't use them much anymore. But if it was sitting in the junk drawer long enough away from the light, when you went to use it, it was dead. I mean, you could not punch any numbers in. You couldn't make any calculations or computations. It was absolutely useless. However, when you leave it out in the light and it begins to collect some of the light rays, stuff inside sparks to life. The screen lights up. It begins to work as it was designed. And in the same way, Jesus is the radiance of God that brings life and light to us. Jesus helps us to be touched by the sun. And through the light, the sun touches us. God touches us and actually energizes us and helps us to function as we were designed. It says in this passage, the sun radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God, and he sustains everything by his mighty power and his command. Now, just looking across the room, I can tell that some of you are a little worried right now. You're doing the math. You know there's 14 verses in this chapter. You know we've had 4 points and we're only on verse 3. You're wondering, how much longer is this going to go? Well, I will put you at ease. The next 11 verses form our next point. In fact, I'm going to not even read all of the 11 verses. I'm just going to kind of skip our way through to give you a sense of what it says. But let's dig into this last portion and one last characteristic of Jesus. So verse 4, skipping through to 14. This shows that the Son is far greater than the angels. For God never said to any of the angels what he said to Jesus, "You are my Son." And when he brought his supreme Son into the world, God said, "Let all of God's angels worship him." Regarding the angels, his servants, but to the Son he says, "Your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. You rule with a scepter of justice. Therefore, O God, your God has anointed you, pouring out the oil of joy on you more than anyone else." And God never said to any of the angels, "Sit in the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet." So what is going on here? Why is the author using 11 verses to convince us that Jesus is better than angels? Well, you need to note that in these 11 verses, the author draws directly from 7 Old Testament passages to build his argument. What is the argument? Number 5, Jesus is better than angels. Now, most of us hear that, and we have some reactions. One is, duh, that's obvious. And the other is, that's completely irrelevant to my life. What do I care? What do I care if Jesus is better than angels? I mean, I never even thought about it. I'm not tempted to be worshiping angels. So this is kind of a non-starter. So why spend 11 verses arguing that Jesus is better than angels? Well, here's why. The early Christ followers didn't have the luxury of 2,000 years of theological thought and processing. They didn't have shelves of books about Jesus, podcasts explaining every verse in the Bible. In fact, they didn't even have the whole Bible. They only had the Old Testament. And they had a few letters that were circulating about Jesus, but they were not put together yet. They didn't have seminaries. They didn't have the 2.5 million churches teaching the Bible around the world. They didn't have Bible conferences or Bible colleges. They didn't have the 9,000 Christian radio stations that are around the world. They were standing at ground zero. All they had was their Old Testament Jewish faith, and they were trying to figure out who is Jesus. And in the first century, Jewish thought held angels in the highest regard. Majestic, radiant, beings who stood in the very presence of God. You could understand that. They had names like Michael and Gabriel, and they operated in this heavenly hierarchy of warriors and messengers and guardians. In fact, you could say that they were the original guardians of the galaxies. They were believed to have mediated the laws of Moses and being there at the very heart of the covenant story. Reverence for angels ran so deep in many of the Jewish communities that Paul later on in Colossians 2:18 warns, do not worship angels. Because many Jews believed that angels were the ones who governed the nations. They waged cosmic wars and battles, and they shaped the human existence in unseen realms. It's such a climate where angels were being exalted and they were powerful and they were near divine. The writer of Hebrews urgently comes to them and says, whoa, you got it all wrong. Jesus is better than angels. He is so much better. In fact, his argument is that the angels, the most powerful of the angels, the most radiant of the angels, the most battle-worthy, nation-ruling angels will bow down to worship Jesus. This chapter boils down to this. The writer of the Hebrews is saying this: people, you need to know, you need to have a really clear head on who Jesus is. Now listen, I know life is hard right now. I know that you're getting it from all sides. From the synagogue and your Jewish families, you're getting persecuted. You're getting ostracized. From the Romans, they are persecuting you because you're not bowing down to worship their emperor Caesar. You're getting this dual persecution from all sides. I get it. I know that you long for salvation from the pain and the pressure. Who wouldn't? I know your former faith taught you that the roaring power and the regal posture and the radiant presence of angels, they were nation rescuers. They were messengers from God. But you need to understand this, that the strongest and the most splendid and the most powerful of angels pales in comparison to Christ. Listen, and this is so important, the writer says, listen, don't get sucked in to worshiping the lesser and miss worshiping the better. That is the very same message that is echoing down the corridors of history for 2,000 years to us today. Don't get sucked in to worshiping the lesser and miss worshiping the better. You should never worship or elevate anything in your life that will one day bow before or be laid before Jesus. Jesus is better. Jesus alone is worthy. One day, everyone will know it. So live your life like you already do.